Lee Kuan Yew understood something about great powers that few leaders ever say out loud. Nations do not decline because they lack strength. They decline because they refuse to acknowledge limits. And if you apply his strategic lens to today's global environment, one uncomfortable reality begins to surface. The United States Navy is not weak, but it is stretched. And that difference matters. Think about what that means. For decades, the U.S. Navy operated under a simple assumption: uncontested maritime dominance. Carrier strike groups could deploy almost anywhere. Sea lanes were secure. The American industrial base could sustain long-term presence. That era is ending, not because America suddenly lost its power, but because the strategic environment changed faster than the structure of the fleet. Lee Kuan Yew would have called this a mismatch between ambition and capacity, the illusion of infinite presence. The U.S. Navy is built around global presence. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, amphibious assault ships, these are not just tools of war. They are instruments of reassurance and deterrence. When a carrier strike group sails into a region, it sends a message without firing a shot. But here's the problem nobody wants to admit. Presence consumes readiness. Every day a ship is deployed is a day it is not undergoing maintenance. Every surge deployment compresses training cycles. Every extended patrol increases wear on hulls and crews. Think about the arithmetic. A carrier strike group deploys for 7 months. Maintenance requires months more. Training cycles must follow. That means a single operational deployment ties up a ship for far longer than headlines suggest. Now multiply that across multiple regions: Western Pacific, Middle East, Red Sea, Mediterranean, North Atlantic. Each theater demands visible American presence, but there are only so many hulls. The two-ocean reality. Lee Kuan Yew predicted that the Pacific would become the center of gravity for global power competition. He believed the United States would remain a Pacific power, but only if it recognized the scale of China's rise early. That scale is now undeniable. The People's Liberation Army Navy has expanded rapidly. Shipyards operate at high capacity. New destroyers, cruisers, and submarines enter service at a pace that forces recalculation. The U.S. Navy still maintains qualitative advantages: experience, alliances, nuclear-powered carriers, and submarines. But quantity matters, and geography matters more. The Pacific is vast. Operating across it requires fuel, logistics hubs, repair facilities, munition stockpiles, satellite networks. It is not just about ships, it is about sustainment. Meanwhile, the Atlantic theater cannot be ignored. European allies expect reassurance. Russian naval activity remains relevant. Arctic routes are opening. The U.S. Navy was not designed to face simultaneous peer-level pressure in both oceans while also conducting persistent Middle Eastern security operations. That is the structural strain. The maintenance backlog nobody talks about. This is the part rarely dramatized. Ships age. Hull integrity degrades. Electronics require upgrades. Reactor refueling takes years for nuclear vessels. Dry docks are limited. Skilled shipyard workers are in short supply. When operational tempo increases, maintenance windows shrink. When maintenance shrinks, future readiness declines. It does not happen overnight. It accumulates. Lee Kuan Yew believed institutional decay begins quietly. It is rarely dramatic at first. It appears as small inefficiencies: delays, deferred upgrades, compressed training schedules. Over time, those inefficiencies compound. Today, several American naval shipyards operate near capacity. Expanding industrial infrastructure takes years. Training new skilled labor takes time. Meanwhile, global commitments do not slow. That is the uncomfortable truth. The human factor ships are steel, but navies are human. Extended deployments strain families. Recruitment pools shrink as demographics shift. Retention becomes harder in a high-tempo environment. A destroyer may appear fully operational on paper, but fatigue impacts performance. Lee Kuan Yew often emphasized discipline and morale as strategic variables. He understood that institutions are living systems. When overstretched, even the strongest institutions begin to show stress. High operational tempo across multiple theaters affects sailors, pilots, technicians, and officers alike. Burnout is not visible in satellite imagery, but it is real. The carrier dilemma: aircraft carriers remain the centerpiece of American maritime power. They project air superiority, they enable strike operations, they symbolize dominance, but they are also high-value targets. Modern anti-ship missile systems have extended range dramatically. Surveillance technology improves yearly. Hypersonic research compresses warning timelines. The carrier remains formidable, but it no longer operates in uncontested waters. That forces doctrinal adaptation. distributed maritime operations, greater use of submarines, unmanned surface vessels, networked sensor grids. Transformation is underway, but it is expensive, and transition periods create vulnerability. Lee would likely describe this as strategic inflection, the moment when an established system must evolve before external pressure forces change under duress. The budget-constrained defense budgets appear massive in absolute terms, but naval shipbuilding competes with other priorities: domestic infrastructure, entitlement programs, debt servicing. Shipbuilding cycles span decades. Political cycles span years. Kuan admired long-term planning. He believed survival required multi-decade thinking. Naval procurement demands exactly that mindset. A submarine authorized today will serve into the 2060s. If force structure decisions lag behind strategic realities, correction becomes costly. And here lies the problem nobody wants to admit. Strategic commitments expanded faster than fleet growth. Simultaneity, the real pressure. The Cold War had clarity. The primary focus was the Soviet Union. Today's environment is diffuse. China in the Indo-Pacific, Russia in Europe, instability in the Middle East, threats to commercial shipping in key choke points, emerging Arctic competition. Each scenario alone is manageable. Together, they create simultaneity. Simultaneity stretches logistics, intelligence, maintenance, and personnel pipelines. Lee Kuan Yew repeatedly warned that great powers falter when they attempt to respond everywhere equally. Prioritization is not weakness, it is discipline. But politically, prioritization is difficult. Every region argues its importance, and so the Navy becomes the instrument of reassurance everywhere. The industrial base. Question. Another rarely discussed issue is industrial resilience. Shipyards cannot expand overnight. Skilled welders, engineers, and technicians require years of training. Supply chains for advanced propulsion systems and electronics are complex. A prolonged high-end maritime conflict would require rapid repair and replacement capacity. Is that capacity sufficient? That question is debated quietly, but rarely publicly. Lee believed that economic depth ultimately determines military endurance. A nation's ability to sustain production under stress matters more than initial strength. If maritime competition intensifies, industrial throughput becomes decisive. Alliance burden sharing. The United States maintains unmatched alliances: Japan, Australia, South Korea, NATO members, regional Gulf partners. Lee Kuan Yew saw alliances as America's structural advantage, but alliances also create expectations. Partners rely on American naval presence for deterrence. Could greater burden sharing ease pressure? Possibly, but interoperability, capability gaps, and political constraints complicate that transition. Still, distributed security frameworks may become essential if the Navy is to avoid permanent overstretch. Technology as relief or risk. Unmanned vessels promise to extend reach without increasing crew size. Artificial intelligence enhances targeting and logistics. Long-range precision weapons improve deterrence, but technological transitions carry risk. Integration takes time. Testing cycles matter. Over-reliance on unproven systems creates vulnerabilities. Lee Kuan Yew valued innovation, but warned against assuming technology replaces strategy. Tools amplify policy, they do not substitute for it. The psychological dimension: markets react to naval deployments. Allies respond to carrier movements. Adversaries probe when presence thins. Perception matters. If adversaries sense strain, they test limits. If allies sense fatigue, they hedge. Therefore, acknowledging overstretch publicly is politically sensitive. That is why the problem remains largely unspoken. Not because leaders are unaware, but because admitting structural limits invites strategic probing. Lee Kuan Yew, however, believed realism strengthens credibility. Clear-eyed assessment prevents larger mistakes. The strategic choice ahead. The U.S. Navy problem nobody wants to admit is not immediate defeat. It is long-term sustainability. Can current fleet size support simultaneous multi-theater deterrence for decades? Can industrial capacity scale fast enough to offset rising peer competition? Can personnel pipelines sustain retention under constant deployment? Can strategic commitments be prioritized without signaling weakness? These are structural questions, and they determine whether current strain becomes manageable adaptation or accumulated vulnerability. Why it matters now. Global competition is intensifying. Maritime trade remains central to the world economy. Choke points are contested. Great power rivalry has returned. The Navy remains the backbone of American global power projection, but backbones must be protected from cumulative stress. Lee Kuan Yew understood this dynamic decades ago. He admired American strength, but warned that even strong systems require calibration. The oceans are not shrinking, the demands are not decreasing, and time is not neutral. The uncomfortable truth. The U.S. Navy is being pushed to the limit not because it is failing, but because it is indispensable. Every crisis calls for ships. Every ally requests presence. Every adversary tests response time. That indispensability creates overload risk. The problem nobody wants to admit is that strategic clarity, not just shipbuilding, must come first. Without prioritization, expansion alone will not solve overstretch. Without industrial depth, modernization cannot sustain pace. Without personnel resilience, hull counts are meaningless. Kuan Yew's lesson was simple but difficult. Power must align with reality. Today, reality demands choices. The Navy can remain dominant, but dominance requires discipline. The world sees carriers sailing and assumes limitless strength. The deeper story is endurance. And endurance, more than firepower, will determine whether American maritime power remains decisive in the decades ahead.